Beverly's beautiful mink coat transformed into a throw and a pillow. Beverly's coat was in excellent condition, very lovely to work with. She wanted to use the inside of her lining for her backing. She also wanted a pillow from any leftover fur. So we used the lining, but the customer chose not to include the monogram, so that was taken out of the final product. Here I'm just removing the lining. Removing any supportive material and batting. And you'll see that I'll be cutting out a lot of strings because the collar area always has a lot of strings that are attached. Now I'm removing the shoulder pads and I'm working on the cuff area. And removing the pockets. Here I am removing any of the hardware. Now I'm going to be working on the strips, and I'm taking my pen and I'm marking the areas where I need to mend some of the holes. I also let out the top of the coat because there was a big dart there, and if I didn't, it wouldn't lie flat. And I always want my strips to be as straight as possible and as flat as possible. And I use my quilting ruler to maintain straight lines, as well as keeping really good accuracy. This piece will be used in probably either the border or the pillow, and I am removing just some of the excess lining that's on the outside of pieces. All tiny pieces of fur will be able to be used. So here the pieces are laid out on the table, and I'm going to flip them over, and what I'm going to do here is now I'm going to work on the placement of the pieces themselves. So I take these very long pins and I place them into my mat, stretch it out as much as I can, flatten out the fur, and the top is straight because I have everything measured out. Placing those pins at the bottom and stretching it out, making sure everything is even. Now I take my ruler and I use my marking pencil to mark the bottom seam area, and I'm going to mark periodically along the center of the furs, so this way when I go to sew it on the fur machine, all I'm going to do is match up those hash marks. Before I sew this seam, I have to take a look at my edge, and this particular edge is jagged. So if I try to sew that on the fur machine, it's going to break the needle. So what I'm going to do is I could either take my farrier's knife, or I can take my scissor and just make this nice and straight. So since it's a small little piece, I am just going to snip off the pieces that are slightly above the rest of the seam. So I make it nice and straight. This way it will not break a needle as I sew it, because these machines are a little finicky, and if your seam is slightly above the wheels, they will definitely break. So before I sew the seam, I'm just going to check across the whole seam, make sure that there isn't a tiny little piece that's just a little bit higher than the rest, and if not, then it's ready to go. So earlier I marked on the table with my green grease pencil these little marks, and those are there so I can line up the fur properly, because what happens is when you are sewing on a fur machine, that as it moves, sometimes the outer, at least for me, the outer wheel stretches it out a little bit more than the opposite side. So what I'll do is I'll tack these spots first wherever I marked it, and then I will go back in after these are tacked, and then I will clip those as well. So this way, when I sew across the seam, it will be relatively even without any puckers. So that's the biggest thing. We don't want the fur to pucker. Now I'm going to take those seams and I am going to sew them on the fur machine, making sure that the fur is nice and even across. And here I'm removing a tiny little piece of fur that was above those wheels, because if I didn't, it would break a needle. Now that they're all sewn together, I lay it out again, and I have already marked the bottom of the fur, and now I am going to even out the bottom by cutting the bottom part of the fur. I'm going to use again a quilting ruler as a guide until I get to areas that are really too small and I need to remove my quilting ruler. Paying very close attention not to cut into the hair, but only into the pelt. Those parts that are removed will be used in the pillow or in the borders. I did this in real time, so this way you could see really how careful you have to be and how long it takes to do these furs. It does take quite a while. So it's turned over, and that's what it looks like before I add the borders. It is 49 by 48 inches. For the borders, I made little hash marks all along the border, And I also made markings for the direction of the pelt, because when it's upside down, I don't really know which direction the fur is going unless I look at it. So I always make marks on there to make sure that I'm going in the right direction. So this is, draw that arrow, this is direction of the fur. And again, little hash marks all along so I can match them up to the correct sides. Also on the fur itself, I always mark what side it is. So this is the left side, there's an L. And on the corresponding strip, also going to find the one that says an L. So this way I am never incorrect when I go to put the pelts together. And then I just match up my hash marks on either side, and then I clip it all together. So here I am matching up my markings. Making sure that the border will be even on the main part of the throw, and there you are, it is completed. And then once that's done, you wet it down and stretch it out. So now it measures 56.5 by 54 inches. Then I lay my protective cotton, and now it's time to pick the outside border. Now, because the lining was not wide enough, I asked the customer to choose which lining she wanted on the edge, and what she did pick was a beautiful silk crepe that went on the edges. And I brought it to the long arm machine, and she chose a cross-hatch pattern. And when you quilt something on the long arm, it must be at least 10 inches bigger than the final project, because when you quilt it, it will shrink down the actual lining. And as you can see how beautiful it actually came out. Some of that lining will also be used in the pillow. And here's the final project completed. The drape is lovely. The backing looks fantastic. That's a close-up of the two pieces connecting. So once the main throw was completed, this is what I had to work with. And as you can see, it's a lot of little pieces, but this is what it turned out to be. It measures 14 by 14. We used the lining on the backing. It came out beautiful. Come visit us at dinahsquilts.com.